So I'm with Marc Dunkelman, the author of Why Nothing Works, a brand new book released in February 2025. And before we get going, I'd love for Mark to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about the book.
Thanks. Yeah, my name is Marc Dunkelman. I'm a fellow at the Wasson Institute for International Public Affairs at Brown. I'm a recovering political hack. I worked in Washington for a long time on the Senate and the House side for Democrats. Worked in a few think tanks with the Clinton Foundation. Um, and I now write for a living. So, trying to take all those years of experience and the things that I've noticed from inside the great Leviathan and explain it to people on the outside.
It's very obvious that you have taken a great pride in writing because the book is written in such a readable way that anybody who sees the title shouldn't need to worry that this is a book for wonks. It may be by a wonk and by a politico and by someone who's got a lot of years experience, but it's written for sort of the average American who just has the question about why can't we're unlimited wealth basically and the richest nation in the history of the world, and why we still can't build anything, why government services are still stuck in limbo, if they even can or will be existing at all in the next couple months even. So I'm curious as to sort of what your angle was to prepare for this book and why you chose to take the particular attack you did in terms of the tone and how you laid the book out.
Yeah. So I went to school in New York, and when I was in college, I read The Power Broker, which is like the great tome from, I'm sure, the vast majority of your listeners and readers have either read the book or claim to have read the book. One of the two, it's quite long. And I read that in college in the 90s and was really taken with it, as most people who read it are. And then 20 years later, I was commuting. I live in Providence now. I was commuting to New York pretty regularly, and I was rereading the book. The most famous portion of that book, as you'll recall, is this chapter called One Mile, in which Robert Moses, the most powerful man in New York, who's never been elected to any office, but has managed to sort of come to take control of how everything is built, all the highways, the parks, the lots of housing projects, great things like the great developments like the UN and the Lincoln Center and on and on and on. And I was commuting into New York and reading that book, and that One Mile is about his building the Cross Bronx Expressway, which was very controversial at the time. It was, digging a trench through this vibrant working class portion of the city. Everyone was opposed to him, the mayor, all the community groups, all the people whose homes he was going to take. And he got it done nevertheless, despite all this opposition. And it was now 20 years since I'd first read the book, and I'm sitting there and noticing that as I get out of the station at Penn, like I'm walking up through like what feels like a rat's warren, like Penn Station, which is world's second most heavily the world's second most heavily trafficked transit hub. More people go through Penn Station every day than go through LaGuardia, JFK, and Newark combined. That this was essentially the world's financial capital's front door, and it was like just a rodent's nest. It was just disgusting. And how could it have been that I was reading back in my college days that they were going to redo Penn Station? 20 years later, they haven't done it. And yet Robert Moses managed to do this project that everyone wanted to say no to, like without anyone stopping him. Penn Station, no one has any real objection to a nicer Penn Station, but they couldn't get it done. And so I wanted to understand in a way that would make sense to me, but also make sense to my dad, who's like not from the world of politics. Like, why is it that no one could say no to Moses, and now no one could say yes to the most obvious projects? Um, and my initial reaction was there must be some skunk in the works, right? There must be some character who's saying no, some indolent character who just stands in the way. And what I discovered is that's not true. And it's not true of lots of projects. It's not that there are individual problems on all of these projects that we can't done. It can't, It's not that there are individuals who are it's not that there are individuals who are standing in the way of each successive project. It's that the system was built to fail. The system was built to stop projects in almost every venue. And that's a change. That's a change from a previous era, not that distant in American history. And it's one that we on the left certainly have not really had to grapple with. So I'm trying to tell that story of how progressivism turned from a movement that wanted to do big things to one that wanted to stop them.
I love the three arguments that sort of frame the book here, and I'd love to go through them because this is not a treatise against progressivism. I want to make sure that folks listening to this is not a let's fall back into our caves and embrace conservatism and no quote unquote progress because we've now seen that progressivism leads to this giant cluster of getting nothing done and roadblocks. So your first argument, I want to quote from the book here: progressives have conned themselves into believing that they're focused on one thing when in reality the movement is broadly about something else. Can you talk about what
Yes,
that means a little bit?
sure. So from the very beginning, progressivism has been this marriage of two very separate impulses. The first, which I call Hamiltonian, is an impulse to see a problem, certainly a tragedy of the common, and say, we can't get a sewer system built in the neighborhood. We can't get parks built. We can't have a good school system. That's because power is too diffuse. What we need to do is collect it in the hands of some expert who's going to wield it responsibly in the public name. So someone's going to choose where the pipes are going to go. Someone's going to choose who are going to be the teachers. Someone's going to choose where the park's going to be. And we're all going to benefit because this expert is going to get to make these big decisions on all our behalf. That's a Hamiltonian impulse. It's how to do big things. There's a second impulse, which I call Jeffersonian. And the narrative in the Jeffersonian narrative is that there is a powerful institution sitting above us that is coercing individuals to do things that they don't like, and that salvation would come if we took the power that that powerful institution had and returned it to ordinary people so they're no longer oppressed. So um, there's the sort of classic example there is civil rights or reproductive rights, sort of this notion that there's a bureaucrat who's going to tell a woman what she's going to do with her body. Progressives really resent that and hate it. And so they want to return that power, that authority back to the individual woman to be able to make a choice for herself. So these are two different impulses. Neither is good, neither is bad in all cases. They're both well intentioned. They are appropriate in some cases, but it's a strange combination, right? And in the early progressivism, if you go back to your textbook from, your sophomore year of high school survey of American history, like they'll go through the litany of things that the early progressives were for women's suffrage and for an income tax and for this and that. And then they'll say two things and not even recognize that they are at odds with each other. One is that they were for blue ribbon commissions, which they were, and they were also for public referenda. Well, blue ribbon commissions are giving power to some like effete group of experts to wield power, right? The 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 idea of public referenda is you don't trust the people in power, so you're going to return it to plebiscites. Like those are both maybe appropriate in certain circumstances. There are advantages and disadvantages to both, but they are like fundamentally terms of like a governing philosophy at odds with one another. And so the point of my first argument is that progressivism thinks of itself, I think in most cases, as being entirely Hamiltonian. Like if you were to go to another country and ask which is the party of the center left, you would think that's the party that wants government to do more. But that when in fact you talk about what progressives have fought for over the course of the last 50 years, in many cases, it's not been about big government. It has been about strangling government or putting guardrails around government authority so that people like Robert Moses aren't doing terrible things like the South Bronx, like the Cross Bronx Expressway again.
So the second argument then is that these two ideologies are constantly in conflict with one another.
Yeah.
And I find that fascinating too, because in that there needs to be a communications, uh, a throughway, to use a word kind of near and dear to my heart here. If these two ideologies are constantly at odds with each other, how then do you message what it is that the Progressive Party means to do? What is their goal as an organization or as a big tent organization that tries to capture all these ideologies? What's the process?
Well, I mean, the two ideas have been at odds since the very beginning. The first story I tell in the book in chapter one is the story of the 1912 Progressive Party Convention, where it's this big fight between those who think that the problem in America is that these big corporate trusts have too much power, and therefore we should break them up using sort of a beefed up version of the Sherman Antitrust Act. And those who think that the great problem in America is that there is already too much competition, and that rather than break up big businesses so that there is even more competition, and insurance salesmen have even more incentive to rebate their wealthiest customers, so that to the detriment of working class customers who are trying to buy insurance, et cetera, that the real salvation would come in creating huge government bureaucracies that would regulate these big companies, right? So like the thing that ties, I think, progressivism together is that it is not conservative, right? Like our view generally is not that government gets in the way of the good. Our view is like the world is imperfect. It should be perfected in some way. And like the means of doing that, that's where we disagree, right? And so there are certain situations, even today, with like the rising abundance agenda, there are certain elements of the abundance agenda about housing that are really Jeffersonian, right? Like if you own a plot of land in a suburb and you want to build a fourplex on it rather than a single family home, generally progressives, certainly in the YIMBY community, are saying, I think that the community should be muted and that the individual owner of that property should have the right to do that in a ministerial way, as of right, right? Like no one should be able to stop them. That's a Jeffersonian thing. That's like returning to a woman's right to her body, right? A homeowner has a right to do what he wants with his property or her property. A voter has the right to vote as they want. These are Jeffersonian notions of returning power to the individual. In other cases, like, we want to build transmission lines that will connect the clean energy abundance that we have that's offshore or from hydropower or from wind power or from solar power, whatever it is. The problem today is less that we don't know how to harness that energy. It's that once it's harnessed, wherever it's harnessed, we can't get it to the places that it's needed because we can't build transmission lines. There's no way to return to individuals the power to do that. That's something that needs to be lifted into the power of some bureaucrat who's going to choose where the line is going to go and going to weigh the ups and downs of, is it going to, force someone to cut some trees down in a forest or put some wires up in a way that screws up the vista of the harbor, whatever it is. But like the I'm not sure that the goals of progressivism need to change. It's that we've got sort of two sets of tools, and we need to be thinking much more proactively about which set of tools are appropriate to various challenges that we face.
I think that has been a strain in our country since its founding and probably before in a lot of ways, because the party structures have shifted and changed. The party structures are not necessarily tied to any one ideology over a long period of time. And there may be a reshift in the near future as one party implodes and the other party doesn't know how to take it over. So I'm curious, this is not a question I have, but I'm curious to watch how party alignment sort of matches up with the progressive versus the conservative mindset. And I don't know if they're going to be tied one to each other because there is some overlap. There's sort of the idea of the individual controlling their own destiny in a lot of ways, and that the Hamiltonian version of the extent to which the community is involved or the extent to which one is part of a larger group to get big things done sort of stops at the water's edge for conservatives, where I think there's relatively no bound for a progressive or someone who thinks of themselves as trying to harness the power of government to do big things. It's an interesting thought exercise that I probably think would probably take too long in this conversation to have a full conversation about. But to that point, your third point is that these ideologies are a political liability for the progressive movement. Can you talk about what that means? I think we're seeing it play out, the phenotype of this. We're seeing this in the real world, but in your own words and sort of what defines the structure of this book and your central thesis, talk a little bit about what you mean. Well, how is it a political liability?
Yeah. So you're absolutely first of all, you're absolutely right on the parties that progressivism has sort of been there. There were one time a lot of Republican progressives. The progressives, the original progressives, mostly came out of the Republican Party. Then progressivism really inhabits the Democratic Party, and it's sort of largely there. But up through Nelson Rockefeller and George Romney, like it was hard to deny that there were Republican progressives as well. So like that complicated my language. Like you hear the word progressive today, and often people think of the far left. I'm talking about progressives across the spectrum, from the far left to much more center left, even center right folks who like have an idea that government should be used in a proactive way to improve the lives of ordinary people, many of whom have been left behind. To the meat of your question, though, the broad arc of the book is that from the movement's founding in the late 1800s through the 1960s or 1970s, the Hamiltonian impulse really predominated. It's not that the Jeffersonian impulse wasn't there. Like there was the antitrusters, those are Jeffersonians. Like there were fears of government. There was the Red Scare of the late 19 teens. There's the Red Scare of the 1950s. Like those are moments where progressives are fearful of big government and looking for Jeffersonian protections. But for the most part, the sort of central narrative of progressivism for those 80 years or so is that we should be lifting power up into authorities that can do big things for us. We need that the nation's progress depends on empowering generally men who are thoughtful, publicly minded, publicly spirited, trained experts, but they should be the ones taking the reins and making big decisions for all of us. And like that's the prevailing view. Then something sort of remarkable happens in the 1960s, which is that those men and the establishment that they have formed really becomes discredited because of things like urban renewal, which plow down entire neighborhoods and then that are never rebuilt and displace lots of people. It's discredited because of the Vietnam War, where the best and brightest sent us into a quagmire that seems to undermine the national interest. It's undermined by the wisdom of The Death and Life of Great American Cities by Jane Jacobs, and undermined by Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, who shows that the big ag is spraying chemicals onto crops that are leading to birth defects. By Ralph Nader's book Unsafe at Any Speeds, showing that regulators are putting cars on the road that are basically death traps. All you look at the overall zeitgeist of progressivism in that period, and it is sort of this great awakening that the establishment that the movement had empowered with all sorts of authority through decades was actually not worthy of the power and deference they had been shown. And so, like in the cultural zeitgeist, like you look at these movies that are made in the 1970s as the switch is happening, it's like movies like The Graduate, right? Where the guy says plastics, right? Like that guy is trying to get the main character to come into the establishment and he doesn't want to. Or Chinatown, which is all about sort of a villain taking water from the valley and bringing it to the city of Los Angeles. Or Network, where like the tagline is "I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore." There's yet another a character sort of indicting the establishment, and the power broker comes out at the same time, and Watergate happens, and by the mid 70s, the Jeffersonian notion that real progressive salvation is going to come from sort of defenestrating the old establishment and returning that power to ordinary people is just in the water. And that becomes our view. And so for 50 years, progressivism has been working to essentially put the clamp on government bureaucracies. Our solution to almost every problem is a new level of oversight, a new check, a new demand, a new standard that is somehow going to get the bureaucracy to do what we think is the thing the public needs. And taken together, all of those are well-intentioned efforts to protect endangered species and protect, endangered housing and to ensure that there's equity and then blah, 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 blah. There's just an endless number of checks. And by the end of all these checks, what you have is a government that can't function. And when you have a government that can't function and you're the party of government, that is a lousy political position to be in, right? Like you are selling a product that doesn't work. And when you're selling a product that doesn't work, if you're selling refrigerators and they don't keep the food cold, people are going to go to a different brand. If you're selling that government is the solution to the problem and the government doesn't work, people are going to vote for populism. Like we laid out the red carpet for Trump. We did it to ourselves. And that is terrible to understand that we're culpable in many ways for it, but it also means that we have an opportunity now to right the ship without us having to just scream at Trump voters that they were wrong. If we recognize that we are culpable and that we have some agency here in trying to create a political agenda that works rather than one that just uh, continues to leave us frustrated, we can plot a path back to relevance.
One of the amazing things that I realized while reading your book is I went back and I tried to find an article that I read many years ago that I have cited a dozen times in my writing from Politico called "Why Your Holiday Travel is Awful," and I was like, "Oh, there's this idea of a vitocracy. There's too many cooks in the kitchen. It's the political football and the fight to say no." And lo and behold, who wrote that article? But our famed author, right here, 6 years ago now. And it is an evergreen take, and it applies to so many projects, especially when there's all these stakeholders involved that have all their different needs and nobody wants to be the one left holding the bag, the political baggage for any of these problems. And I think that idea comes across and is expanded, particularly deftly in this book over 8 chapters and 8 stories, and really prescient points and points that I think are going to be pretty nascent, not nascent, prescient for the future of where our government of action or city of yes wants to do in the future. It was just a particularly nice sort of come full circle moment for me when I realized the book that I was reading was written by the same author of whose ideas I've been espousing for a long time. So that's pretty great there. I mean, do you agree with? I'm not exactly sure who coined this word. Some say it was Fukuyama. Some say it was sort of Ezra Klein popularized it. So in your mind, so where are we seeing this vitocracy play out in New York or elsewhere in the country that's preventing us from doing not just big things, but anything? I mean, we're stymied across the board in so many ways. Do you agree with this idea? I mean, well, I would assume you do, but I want to sort of hear it from your own words of, where is this playing out now, and is there a way to unstick it?
Yeah. So, I mean, broadly, yes. I'd flip it a little bit. I think the question, the right now, the vitocracy is sort of this notion that too many people have been given the ability to undermine something they don't like. So someone wants to turn a plot of land that is zoned for single family housing into a fourplex. Someone can veto that because they can use zoning regulations. Someone wants to build a transmission line across a public park. Someone can veto that because there's a provision meant to keep green space green. There are lots of, people can litigate, people can voice their opinions at community meetings. There's a lot of process and proceduralism. The if you flip that around, what photocracy is that it means that nobody has the power to say yes. It's not just that lots of people have the power to say no. It's that nobody has the power to say yes. So, like, if you look in New York, I think like a terrific example of this is congestion pricing. like there is sort of this notion that it was largely a state initiative. They started with this, Michael Bloomberg was talking about this in the aughts. Like it's been 20 years. They spend $1 billion on building the sensors, et cetera, et cetera. And then like Catherine Hochul, sort of at a whim, turns it off in midsummer, decides that it's her decision. She doesn't want to do it. No matter what she did at that moment, if she decided to keep pursuing congestion pricing, if she decided to stop the pursuit of congestion pricing, she was going to get sued, right? There were several lawsuits. I think there are still pending lawsuits against congestion pricing by people who don't want to pay, by the state of New Jersey, by the drivers, by the blah, 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 blah. Trump seems to think that he's got some sort of influence over it. Should he be the one who decides whether we have congestion pricing? Should the mayor? Should the chairman of the MTA? Who is the person ultimately that is supposed to say yes? And what vetocracy means is that in all of these situations, the thing that is missing is a singular figure whose responsibility it is to look at all the factors, the environmental impacts, the spread of the costs among different communities of color, communities of poverty, whatever you have. What is the most efficient use of limited public resources? Is there an orchid species that's going to be affected, or a fish species? Is there some irreparable harm that's going to be done to a historic building? All of these things should be taken into account. They should be. Like we shouldn't ignore these things. But it can't be that each of these things are worthy of a veto. Somebody needs to be able to say, this is a big project. It's going to affect millions of people. It's going to have ripple effects of different kinds, positive and negative, for the environment, for the economy, for the people who live here, for the people who live farther away, for the planet as a whole. Someone needs to be given the power to rule what is the public interest. We're going to ratify this trade-off. We are going to sacrifice this habitat for this endangered species so that we are taking, hundreds of the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of cars and their concomitant pollution off the roads. Like that's a hard call. Like it's not great for that species of fish. It's probably better for all of us who are trying to save the planet from global warming. But like the thing about the vetocracy is less that so many people can say no, and more that there's no one who can ratify the decision to go forward. And like on congestion pricing, I don't think anyone can answer who is the person that ultimately gets to decide whether it happens or not.
I
Is it the
think
governor? Yeah, go ahead.
I think that's such a fantastic sort of segue into this, how we apply this idea to the three main arguments of your book, right? Because there are Jeffersonian, there are Hamiltonian parts of congestion pricing, because it's the individual that's the one doing the traveling, but it's the state, small s state, in terms of who controls the travel and who either allows it or stymies it or makes it free or charges and how much to charge. And then obviously the third argument is the political fight about this and these inherent political battles. And like you said about Governor Hochul, it was a lose, 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 lose situation for her. And what information she was going on and her proclivities, her political aspirations, the people in her orbit, the stakeholders that we know nothing about as advocates and folks working on the technical side. There are so many different pieces here. I mean, the thing that cuts through all of this is communications, and I'm gonna harp on this. And it's the MTA could and has gotten a lot of its messaging correct in terms of what this congestion pricing program, this tolling program can do. But I'm not sure they went far enough in terms of making the case to the Jeffersonian driver who's just thinking, what do I get? I'm paying $9 right now. What do I get? How much Hamiltonian do am I thinking about when I'm commuting in the morning from my home to work or to school or to the doctor or anywhere else I want to go? That doesn't matter. If I'm going to the CBD below 60th Street in Manhattan now, I've got to pay an additional $9 where I didn't have before. And I would love to get your thoughts on who's incumbent on making that case and telling that story.
Fareed Zakaria has this great sort of one-to-one example that he uses, which is that he says, taxes in New York State are twice what they are in Florida. And do voters in New York feel as though they're getting twice the quality of public service? Now, I am not of the view, which seems to be, I feel like for most of my political life, that the notion was that everyone agreed that government needed to be smaller, that it was such a behemoth, and that no one wanted to have their taxes raised. And of course, no one wants to pay more. But if you look at our own behavior, we're all making choices like this all the time. We're willing to spend a little bit more to go to the Olive Garden, and understanding that we're going to get better, higher quality food and a better experience than we do if we went to McDonald's. People choose the Olive Garden all the time. They're not always choosing McDonald's, right? Like we all have some value proposition that we have in our minds. If we pay more, we ought to get better services. And I think that the experience we have, and probably a lot of the skepticism about congestion pricing, is that it does not feel like when you pay more in New York, you're necessarily getting a better experience. It's not like they're building more housing, and much as every mayoral candidate since the 80s has been talking about how they're going to invest and there are going to be more apartments to come online, et cetera, et cetera. It's not as though the experience we're getting on the MTA has gotten so substantially better. I mean, the amount that we spent, you probably are familiar with these figures from the Marin Institute at NYU, but we spent so much money building the Second Avenue subway that we were only able to bring it up to 96th Street. Other places, if we had spent the same amount of money at the rate per kilometer or per mile that they do in other advanced countries like Spain or Portugal or Greece, like that train, that Second Avenue train, would be reaching well into the Bronx, and you'd have many more people connected via the subway. But our process is so laden with vetoes, with checks, with balances, with mandates, that it's almost impossible for money to be spent efficiently. And as a result, people feel it. People feel the government is incompetent. And then, of course, the progressives come back at them and say, well, if you think government is incompetent now, give us more money, give us more authority, and we expect them to buy that bargain. It's a lousy bargain. The challenge for progressives today is to reestablish government's efficacy, is to reestablish in the public's mind a notion that we are the ones who are going to ask people, what did you accomplish over the course of the last week with the public dollars that you were paid as a public servant? What did we as the public get for that? Everyone is excoriating everyone. Lots of progressives are excoriating Elon Musk and Doge for asking that question. I think for good reason, right? The Doge and the Elon Musk, it does not appear that they have the public interest in mind, right? Like that is not an effort to really improve government, or we're suspicious that it is not, that it's a shrouded effort to undermine government rather than improve it. But that being said, it seems entirely reasonable to me for someone in the White House to ask all the federal bureaucrats to justify their continued salary. Like, what are you doing for the American people? Is it being done well? Our position should be, we are going to be more responsible stewards of the public dollar. We're going to get better value for it. We are going to make sure the public is served better by the additional dollars that they give us. And until we can make that case legibly in a way that people can see and feel, I don't think that it's fair to ask them to expand government authority.
This is a perfect segue into the latter part of our conversation here, where I like to bring up this idea of conflict theory versus mistake theory in political science. I'm going to give you a couple examples, and I'm quoting directly from Scott Alexander's post on this from 7 or so years ago. Um, and he says, to massively oversimplify, mistake theorists treat politics as science, engineering, or medicine. The state is diseased. We're all doctors standing around arguing over the best diagnosis and cure. Some of us have good ideas, others have bad ideas that wouldn't help or that would cause too many side effects. Conflict theorists see politics as war. Different blocs with different interests are forever fighting to determine whether the state exists to enrich the elites or to help the people. Let me give you one more example. Mistake theorists view debate as essential. We all bring different forms of expertise to the table, and once we all understand the whole situation, we can use wisdom of crowds to converge on the treatment plan that best fits the needs of our mutual patient, the capital S state. Who wins on any particular issue is less important creating an environment than creating an environment where truth can generally prevail over the long term. Conflict theorists view debate as having a minor clarifying role at best. You can, quote, debate with your boss whether you or not you'll get a raise, but only with the shared understanding that you're naturally on opposite sides. And the quote winner will be based less on objective moral principles than on how much power each of you has. If your boss appeals too many times to objective moral principles, he's probably offering you a crappy deal. So it's this idea of mistake theorists try to address a problem where conflict theorists don't acknowledge that there's a problem at all. And I'm curious, hearing this for the first time, how you think this applies to your base argument or some of the examples that you made in your book.
So I think the progressives, when they saw how abusive the old establishment had been, began to believe that the key to doing things in a fairer, more equitable, more publicly spirited way was to add new voices to the conversation, to, um, in particular, allow the people who are going to be have their homes taken in pursuit of building a highway or whatnot, to be able to have an opportunity to speak to the engineers and to make their case, to have standing in a court, to make sure that there was a proper environmental review. And I think that the narrative behind that effort was a notion that if you bring everyone to the table to discuss some common solution, the fact that people can't get across the river from where they live to where they work, or people, can't find enough housing, or can't this or can't that, that if you get all the voices in the room and talk it out, you will find some sort of accommodation that everyone embraces. This is it's sort of a fantasy that is almost goes without saying. I mean, you read reports, it's sort of remarkable, reports about how to improve the nation's infrastructure, and almost invariably the number one recommendation is tell the community sooner in the process, right? Go to the community earlier so that they can be bought in and they can express their concerns. Well, the truth is this: nobody wants the bridge to be built through their neighborhood. Nobody wants the high-speed rail line to cut through their downtown. No one wants to have their property taken. There's no community benefits agreement. There's no skating rink that can be built nearby that is going to make it so that people want the disruption that can be often crucial for the region as a whole. So the sort of fanciful notion that you can somehow, through engagement, get everyone to say yes is absurd. The question here is, who should get to decide? In the end, there are going to be cases where the disruption to the local community is not worth the benefit to the community as a whole. There are going to be cases where there are wrenching sacrifices that a few people have to make in order to improve the lot of everyone who lives in the region. Like those are both serious situations. In your Scott Alexander analogy, I think that the unfortunate thing is that in the progressive mindset for the last several decades, the notion has been that there is a solution to every problem that requires almost no sacrifice except for money, right? And that if we just gave everybody more power and if we gave everyone additional opportunities to get their concerns seen, that we would find something that was mutually accommodating. But the truth is, like in many of these cases, what we need to have are trade-offs, right? We need someone to be able to ratify these people are going to benefit, these people are going to pay. We're going to try to do our best to compensate those who come out behind. We're going to do our best to serve those who come out ahead in the most expeditious way possible. That should be the progressive mindset. That was theoretically what Robert Moses was supposed to be doing, right? Moses was supposed to be acting in the public's interest and above the sort of the humdrum of parochial politics, and I don't want this in my neighborhood, and I don't want those people living here, and da 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 da. He was going to make these decisions for us. That was too much. That regime was too powerful, and it did not incorporate local or parochial interests. Now we've gone too far the other way, and so it seems to me that the challenge today, if we're going to make government work, we need to have a regime where people can make trade-offs and then we move ahead expeditiously so that we're not paying, 200 and 300% of what other people are paying for the same services elsewhere. And so that people have some notion that when a politician says, I'm going to fix this problem, it gets fixed, which is so at odds with our general impression of what's happening today. People feel so powerless that no matter who they vote in, they won't get the change that they need.
So let's go back to congestion pricing and understand, what the tenor and the momentum of this conversation. The best thing the MTA can do right now is to demonstrate to the public that this is working. And that's telling the stories of the plumber or the worker who does jobs in Manhattan but lives out in Regal Park in Queens and can now do 3 or 4 more jobs a day because he or she is not sitting in traffic all day. We need to tell those stories. We need to tell those stories every day, everywhere, and create this narrative that this is a force for good from a traffic and congestion perspective. It's very interesting. It's very nice and good to say that, oh, the average travel time went down by X number of minutes and the air is this percent cleaner. And that again, that's a very Hamiltonian idea, right? A premise of how does this affect me personally? And it does, of course, but it's this non-point versus point. We often use that in the pollution space, but I'll use it in the political space now, point and non-point political um, touch points here. And from the actual infrastructure space, where is this money going? The MTA has a long history of putting it into a black box. We've got a 20-year needs assessment, we've got a 5-year capital plan, we've got a 10-year this, we've got to replace these tracks and go to computer-based train control, all these different things that are interactive with our system, but the average person doesn't necessarily see any benefit to their daily commute right now, which is what we have to do, I think, as a system, as an authority, as a purveyor of dollars and a spender of of asphalt, right, or of steel and aluminum for our system. What are the small wins the MTA can prioritize right now to say, hey, this money was directly used and bonded and leveraged to build this, and we did it in 2 months.
I
And
agree. Yes. I mean, I think your communications point is absolutely right. I think it's probably downstream of whether the MTA does use the money well, right? Like you're assuming that they will. I have a particular affection for Jana Lieber, who I think is one of our more capable public servants, and so
agreed.
I have confidence that they will. But I doubt most people do. I think most people think that we're wasting a lot of money. I did an event recently with Gina Raimondo where she reminded me we had a program here in Rhode Island called Roadworks, um, RHODE works. So it was an effort to toll trucks that came through the state exclusively to pay for the damage that they did to the nation, to the state's infrastructure. And it was one of her big successes. It's not, it's an important part of her profile that probably people don't recognize, but she insisted, much to her staff's horror, that every project that was financed with roadworks tolls around the state have a green sign by it saying, this project brought to you by roadworks, and then with a green, yellow, red on whether the project was being delivered on budget and on time. And the staff, of course, was worried that the projects wouldn't be delivered on right. They were worried that the Department of Transportation wouldn't come through. But it was her saying, "I am going to be a proper steward of your precious tax dollar. I realize that you're forking over to the state of Rhode Island more than you want, that certainly the truckers, but everyone. And we're going to deliver, and you're going to see like this bridge is going to be expanded. You're going to have less traffic when you're trying to get in and out of Providence or trying to get down to the beach." And I agree with you. Like government should work, and we need to make sure that people see, once it is working, we need to make sure that people see and appreciate that it is working.
In our city here, our incumbent Mayor Adams, has this initiative which has had the right intentions, I think, from the start. The city of yes. We're going to cut through some of the bureaucracy. We're going to build. We're going to pass bills that affect your daily life. And one of the things that I would like to see in the next administration, whether it's his or somebody else's, is the city of yes and what? Tell me about what the projects you're doing. Let's have a let's make this a fun process to communicate about our city. Let's bring infrastructure back down to the personal level. Yes, and what? What do I get for closing my street down for 2 weeks to repave? What does that do for me, and what does that do for my kids? Right? We're going to shut down the subway. We're going to have buses on the street to take over these routes. What do I get for this? What do I get? Let's make a deal with our public infrastructure. We're all paying for it, and it feels like a lot of progressives feel like the government speaks for itself in a lot of ways. We've done these great works. We have a history of doing great works, but I think that's also a sort of a misremembered history. Every time FDR built something for the New Deal, he put a sign up that said paid for by the New Deal. It was a and it wasn't a sign. It wasn't a, this paid for by the bipartisan infrastructure law. It was a chrome plaque just buried in the ground. So it stays there forever. So people remember who did this and created better opportunity for them and their families.
You still see
I'm
them.
never, yeah, they're still there. And I noticed this recently inside Borough Hall, there used to be a canvas sign that said paid for by the bipartisan infrastructure law, and that was taken down almost immediately for whatever reason. But this level of ephemera and people have short memories and what their government does for them. I think it's a big part of sustaining the abundance movement and sort of it really helps you continue to tell your story and why nothing works. This book was just great for telling these stories, and I don't want to spoil any of them. There's eight great chapters in here where each one has a different story and each one tells a different side of this octagon, right? Where there are different touch points and segments and important lessons to be learned here. And I will want to make sure that it's linked in the bio when I send this out and be able to really get everyone at least listen to this interview, go find Mark's other work, but really buy this book so that it's he can keep writing and telling some great stories for us. So thanks for joining us today. Anything else you wanted to plug? Any other last final thoughts here? Anything I got wrong? Anything you
No,
want to
you're,
amend?
you- you're right. You're right on point, and I hope I haven't misspoken. But I feel like you've given me an opportunity to tell the story as it is, and I hope that progressives will take this in the spirit that it was written, which is as a way to get out of the frustration that we have right now, that we can't seem to overcome the appeal of Trump. Well, here's why, and here's a way to do it.
Well, last point is that we engage in their argument. We let them dictate the the story. And I think you mentioned this in your book. We let them control the narrative, and we're constantly in fire hose mode and turning off all the taps instead of creating our own narrative, our own counter narrative. And that is very problematic. It's sort of political affairs 101 when you get into the elected sector. Don't accept the premise of the question if it doesn't align with the story you're trying to tell. It's the first thing you're taught as a candidate for elected office. Tell your story. Don't tell someone else's story. It's strange to me how we've lost a lot of sight of this, and there's lots of reasons why. Part of it probably social media, probably just years of being beat down by a system that doesn't work for you. But lots of different parts go into this. But yeah, I was really excited to read this book. I'm really excited to continue following your work and hopefully some of the ideas here seep their way into our polity. So thanks again.
Thank you, Sam.
Take care.
Take care.